Remember high school? You had your group of friends, maybe even your high school sweetheart. You made the team, you picked a random elective, and you found yourself a lifelong passion. You learned so much more than just algebra. There's a reason they call these the most formative years of our lives. Now, imagine who you'd be if none of that ever happened. What if you didn't have a single friend to lean on during those years? What if you never experienced the camaraderie or value of teamwork? Or saw the impact you had when you cheered for others? What if no teacher ever encouraged you to pursue your passions, and your education was unaccredited, lacking, or non-existent? This was the reality for survivors of the troubled teen industry, and we are taking our teenage dreams back with Survivor Prom. It's not your average prom. Survivor Prom is meant for adults who endured so much that they may have the chance to reclaim just one small piece of the high school experience they never had. Support the Survivor community today by clicking the link below and donating. Follow and share our journey at Survivor Prom.
Hi, this is Janine Miller, and you are watching Pieces of Victory. Today, we have on our show Hannah Kay. Hannah is a survivor of a lockdown residential program that was located in Jay, Florida. It was called Lighthouse. This story resonates with me because I too am a survivor of a lockdown residential program called Victory Christian Academy. It was later rebranded to Genesis by the Sea in Mexico and also Lighthouse in Jay, Florida. It is all connected. In 1985, Michael Palmer, who's running the program, started it in Ramona, California. I did a 50-page deposition about child abuse behind closed doors in this lockdown residential program. Many girls had stories, and yet this preacher was never prosecuted. Instead, he was able to rebrand himself, opening up another facility in Mexico, calling it Genesis by the Sea. Mexico wouldn't put up with him. They found a holding cell for children. And yet America kept it open for an additional 24 years, calling it Lighthouse. Hannah is here today to bravely tell her story of what really goes on behind closed doors in these lockdown residential programs. Please welcome to the show, Hannah Kay. Hannah is a survivor of a lockdown residential program. It was originally Victory Christian Academy, which started in 1985 and then was rebranded in 1991 due to allegations of child abuse, such as child endangerment, malnourishment, locking girls in isolation for days, weeks, months at a time. The preacher that ran this facility, Michael Palmer, ended up rebranding in Mexico, calling it Genesis by the Sea and also Lighthouse in Jay, Florida. He was kicked out of Mexico due to a holding cell for children. Mexico wouldn't put up with him, but yet America kept it open for another 24 plus years. And that's when Hannah ended up getting kidnapped in the middle of the night. What is your story? Do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So like many survivors of the troubled teen industry, my journey kind of began with the legal kidnapping, right? So I was picked up by two strangers in the middle of the night. I was at my parents' home in California, and these people just came into my bedroom. I was knocked out, and they told me, get up and put these clothes on. They had some of my clothes, which I thought was so strange. I couldn't comprehend why they had some of my clothes.
Oh, no.
And they had me change in front of them.
How old were you? I'm sorry to interrupt.
I was, no, you're good. It was about a week before my 13th birthday. So I was pretty much 13.
Oh my gosh, that's so young. That's horrifying.
Yeah. I was super young. I had no idea what was going on. I had seen a glimpse of my father before they walked in, but I couldn't really understand why, this was happening to me. And so they had me change into these clothes. And then they took me downstairs in my parents' house, and They had me put on my shoes. And again, I saw like glimpses of my parents. But I found out later that my parents were actually instructed not to speak to me. Oftentimes, parents of these teenagers are told not to communicate with their child during this event. And they say that this is because the child will obviously ask for help, ask them what's going on, plead their case to be like, don't let these strangers take me from my home.
Right. And this wasn't an event. This was a traumatizing kidnapping.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you had no idea what was going on worse. And they weren't, your parents weren't
responding. They weren't trying to help me at all. And it was very confusing, especially as, a barely 13-year-old girl, to kind of calculate what was going on here. My parents had never talked about sending me to a boarding school or having me taken away or anything like that. So this was all news to me.
So there was no threats or anything like that. And what possessed them to even consider sending you to a lockdown residential? You're only 13.
So I like to talk about how oftentimes there are students at these programs who really didn't do anything wrong. They oftentimes were just, their grades weren't great at school, or maybe they were even like gay or something that's just not a real issue.
Right.
And their parents actually step in and have them sent to these programs. In my case, I was, in fact, a pretty difficult kid to deal with. I was skipping school. I was hanging out with people who were not the greatest for me. And so it was really easy for the program to sell my parents on the narrative that, oh my gosh, your 12-year-old daughter is going to die if you guys don't intervene. And so ultimately that is why they sent me, was because they were convinced that that was going to be the safest place for me, instead of, my home and the school that I was in and what have you. So that's what compelled them. And so these people picked me up in the middle of the night. They put me in the back of their car, which was much like a police car. It actually had the full metal cage around the back, and computers up front. Yeah. And so at that point, I thought that I was being arrested for something. It just adds to all the confusion around the scenario. I'm like, oh, I think I'm being arrested because I'm in a cage and I'm not a criminal, but maybe I literally thought maybe I've done something that I don't know that I've done. Like,
right. Or maybe some kind of guilt by association.
I literally am like, I don't know what I've done wrong, but I think I've done something wrong.
Oh no.
And sorry?
I said, oh no, that's just horrifying.
Yeah, I was so confused. And I'm laughing about it now because that's how I process trauma. But like, it's so crazy what they do to children. And that's why I respond this way. But they put me in this car, and then it felt like they were driving me around for hours. And I don't really understand why. I later learned that it's very common for transporters or goons, whatever you want to call them, to take children and kind of try to disorient them in a way so that if they escape, they cannot like find their way back home. So they don't want to escape.
Do you know if your parents paid for this? Because I'm just going to throw in money everywhere I go.
Yeah. So my parents paid, I believe it was $3,000 a month for our program, which.
Okay. How much did they pay for the kidnapping? For you to be.
I have a receipt for somebody else's parents. So I don't know what my parents paid for the kidnapping.
Ballpark figure of how
a couple grand. A couple of
grand to have your kids kidnapped in the middle of the night.
That's all it'll cost you. Yeah, that's all it'll cost you to traumatize your kid, in case you're interested. So yeah, they drove me around, and I think that they had done that to kind of make me think that I was much farther from home than I actually was, because I'm pretty sure we went to an airport in like LA, which was only an hour away, but I had been driving for hours, and I didn't understand why. And they took me into the airport, and again, I have no idea what's happening. Nobody has told me where I'm going.
Are you in handcuffs at the airport? I want to break this.
I was not handcuffed. I was threatened with handcuffs. They did tell me that they would handcuff me, the old easy way or the hard way. That's what people always say that. And that's what they're referring to. They're saying, we will handcuff you. We will tie you up. We will drag you out of here if you don't just willingly come with us. That's what that is when people talk about that. So they threatened to handcuff me, but I was 80 pounds soaking wet at this point in my life. And they were two very large individuals. So there was no fight in me. I went right out the door with them.
Right.
But they did take me to the airport and like followed me to the bathroom and like watched me in the bathroom at the airport in front of other people. Um, and put me
And
on
no
a
one
plane.
thought that that was a bit odd that they were
You'd
watching you.
think, right? You'd think. I only got one nod from somebody at one point during this entire transport that I could sense that they thought something was wrong. And that was on the second flight because I had to take two planes to get from California to Florida. And on the second flight, we had sat in the wrong seats. The transporters had sat us down in the wrong seats. So somebody came to claim their seat, and they're like, "You're in my seat." And it was very strange to see me, this tiny little like white girl, with these two giant individuals who looked nothing like me. They were like giant Samoan type people, and I was sitting in between them, and they were being very like controlling of who I was talking to. Like they weren't
Right.
allowing me to talk to anybody.
It looks suspicious.
It looked like a suspicious situation where like this little girl is clearly like uncomfortable and like feels very over.
But yet nobody did anything about this. No one
no
helped you.
And they were very much like, if you give us any hard time during this process, like you're gonna regret it type thing. We were going back to the hard way at that point. So I wasn't like screaming out to talk to anybody. I was just like just scared, to be honest with you. I was in a major just freeze response and submitting to whatever they needed from me at that time for survival.
I'm surprised you weren't crying on the plane, but you were probably just in shock.
No, I wasn't crying, but I was definitely in shock.
That would have definitely drew attention if you were crying.
Yeah, no, I didn't cry. I was definitely in shock. I wouldn't eat. At one point, they had said that I could get some food on the plane, and I said no. Yeah, I was definitely just in a shock response. I still was not sure where I was going. They had not told me where I was going at that point. So it was all just question marks. And until I really had that answer, I didn't feel like I could move forward. So once we got off the second plane in Florida, we were coming out of Pensacola and we got in a van. And that is kind of on that drive there is kind of when they started to open up about kind of where I was going or what was happening. And they just kind of vaguely told me, you're going to a place that your parents wanted you to go to, and, it's a school. And I was like, okay, like, whatever. I mean, at this point, at least I know my parents are sending me here, I guess. But it didn't make sense to me as to why I was forcibly taken from my home to be sent here.
Right.
And the reason, of course, is because no child in their right mind would purposefully submit themselves to a place that treats children this way. It's funny that people don't ask themselves why children don't just go to these programs. Anyway, so at that point, they got me to the facility and the staff came out. And of course, they're wearing the full garb of what I at that time thought was just like Amish people attire or like Mennonites. I didn't know. I'd never seen somebody not jokingly wear a skirt to their ankles before. I was just like, what is happening? They came out like long, attire. And they brought me in, and immediately for the first time I saw, the magnetic doors and the key lock on the doors, which I assume you guys had as well. But, they told me to turn around so they could enter the code in the door and open the front door. And they took me in there. And I went to my new girl shower where they body searched me and checked to see if I had somehow brought anything from California, I guess. And then when I was in my shower, they took the last part of my identity from me, which was my clothes, and replaced them with whatever clothes they had in like the free clothes bucket. And that was kind of my first day.
They delouse you as well? I'm sorry to interject.
They did not delouse me. They just had me shower.
Okay. They deloused us. And by the way, we didn't have the padlocks, just so the audience knows the difference between Victory and Christian Academy, because we had a 12-foot fence with barbed wire on top.
Oh my gosh.
It was a former FBI facility.
Oh my gosh. That is crazy, Janine.
So there's no way we could have got out of there.
And it's funny because they used to mock people from Victory and Genesis and their attempted escape attempts. they would tell us stories about times girls tried to escape, like laughing, oh, this girl broke her ankle, ha ha ha. Like
Right.
they would laugh about children trying to escape. Like, what
And
kind of person
Michelle
are you?
Erickson was one of them. And it's going to be in my screenplay, by the way. I don't want to give away too much. But I had no clue during the time when I was locked up that there was a section without the barbed wire.
Hmm.
And they found it and they hopped the fence. But one girl, I guess, hurt her ankle. And then Michelle Erickson climbed back in. I don't know why she did that, but she climbed back in. I guess she was afraid of getting caught and it be worse.
Yeah.
So she climbed back not knowing that she was under surveillance.
And were you guys allowed then to kind of be outside since there was a fence?
No, yes and no, and I'll explain. So when we did hard labor, we were digging ditches out in the back. And I'll just use me for an example. I did it a lot and I would volunteer a lot. So, and then I would get into less trouble, but trouble in this place is you can forget a pencil and, be persecuted, right?
Yeah.
So you couldn't make a mistake. You were on edge constantly.
Yeah.
At any rate, if you were just more respected and you had to really earn it.
Yeah.
And you would not want to run away at this point, because if you did, you would get it 100 times worse than what it is locked up inside. Yeah. And you want them to trust you at this point, right? Mm-hmm. So we were outside, supervised by Brother Brown, out digging ditches outside the 12-foot fence with barbed wire. As long as he was supervising it, we would never be on our own.
Okay.
But if we were to run,
I definitely understand what you're saying. Like, you need to earn their trust, and once you're in that position, that's as good as it gets for you in the program. So
that was really, as good as it gets. If you
don't want to mess it up at that
outside
point.
Doing hard labor. And by the way, they weren't giving you bottled water either. OSHA should have been there.
Yeah.
No bottled water, no pay. It was child slavery.
You're getting at.
That would have been more than what
I mean, you guys weren't paid at all, right?
We were child slavery. Okay. And the same thing with you.
Yeah. We also did work every day. In fact, I'm sure they did this with you guys too. I mean, they would pull us out during school hours. So instead of a child being in school like they should be, they're now being forced to go out and cut down trees and haul away limbs and all that kind of hard labor, or just pulling weeds. They would get all 30, 60 of us out there pulling weeds.
In fact, I went from honorable mention and memorizing The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe and was top student in my class to, I don't want to go to school anymore. I don't want to do any, because you can't focus when you're being abused.
Yeah.
And so I went every chance I had. And plus I had so much anger that I needed to release it. And
I definitely liked it. Like, if you got to go outside, I mean, the only time that we were outside was for PE, which, could have been maybe playing a sport for a bit. Like sometimes they would let us kick the soccer ball around under their obvious supervision, or, running us like we were in a military camp. We had the guy who ran our PE was a former Air Force vet, and he would take us out there and run us, and sometimes would run us till we threw up. And I myself watched him drag a student across the field because they couldn't run anymore.
Oh my God, that's awful.
Oh yeah. And then she was put in GR because she couldn't run anymore, and she was overweight and just not capable of keeping up, and he physically dragged her across the field because she threw up and said she couldn't run anymore. So
that's so sad. It was very militant with us too. And if you didn't comply with them, let's just tell the the Get Right room, because this is going to the beginning of the interview, is a room of isolation where girls are kept in there for days, weeks, and months on end. And also they're going to the bathroom in there. Correct? I've heard stories.
Ours, girls would wet themselves a lot in ours because they were not in control of when they were allowed to use a restroom.
And that's so sad.
So you would have to wait until the staff comes and allows you to go to the restroom, and they would walk you in a jail line with other students to the restroom all the way back. But oftentimes it wasn't, I don't know what was wrong with this program and not understanding how often children that drink 6 cups of water a day by demand need to use the restroom. They need to use the restroom, and they would just never give us enough restroom breaks. So kids would soil themselves all the time. I mean, not even just kids in the isolation box.
Child a restroom break. So the reason why I'm saying that is because a child in a program should be able to freely walk to the bathroom whenever they want.
Yes.
Whenever they want.
Absolutely.
There should be, it shouldn't even be a thought process.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that way there. And even at night with the alarm systems, I don't know if you had the alarm systems, what we had crisscross laser beams that was like Tron. And I mentioned that in my book. And if you were to just jump or put your leg out, you would set the alarm excruciating noise throughout all the dorms.
You're saying if you moved your leg outside of your bed, is that what you're saying?
It would go off.
Oh my goodness.
It would go off.
So we didn't have alarms within the room, but we had alarms exiting the room. Gotcha. Right. So we had, and the bathrooms were locked at night. So there was no where you could go. The bathrooms were locked. So.
Oh, wow. See, with us, if you had to wake up a helper, which is another student in charge of all the students, like Lord of the Flies, if you had to wake up another helper, then you would get a demerit, and a demerit's a punishment. So you're going to get punished, and the punishment was a lot more harsh because you had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. So now it's 500 lines of I will not ask my helper in the middle of the night to use the restroom 500 times. And then
and that was up for us too. If you had to use the restroom during an unapproved time, you were in trouble.
So most of the girls were holding it in. And what happens when you hold in your urine? You're more
you get all kinds of damage
to get UTI.
Yeah. I mean,
girls suffer from UTIs after this program.
Many and kidney problems. A lot of them report kidney problems. Like documented issues, like big time, and girls that I know had major struggles in this department because there was just, I don't know why they were so weird about this. The pastor's wife actually stood up one time during Bible memo, which is our midday church service. We went to church 3 times a day, and said the doctor said it's not physically possible for you guys to have to use the bathroom as much as you claim. So you're all lying and you're all just trying to get out of things to use the bathroom.
Oh my God.
And it was just ridiculous. Girls would literally be in church, sitting in a room of 50, 60 people and just wet themselves right there in the middle of the service because they they know they're going to get in so much trouble if they ask somebody to take them to the restroom 10 feet away. And they couldn't even do that because they're like, I'm going to get in so much trouble. All my privileges are going to be taken away if I get this.
And are you listening to yourself right now? You said for somebody to take the girl to the bathroom. Yeah. We're not animals, but that's the way it was in there.
Yeah, that is the way it was. Yeah, you couldn't even if you had to go and you're like, I'll take the punishment. You still couldn't go alone. You're not allowed to use the bathroom alone. That's not allowed. Yeah, it was very animalistic the way that they treated us. And in fact, so many kids when I was there were wetting the bed at night because if you got up to use the restroom and the doors were locked, you would have to wake up a helper who then would have to radio the staff who would come in, and then they would punish the entire dorm. They'd turn all the lights on and say, everybody get up and use the bathroom. Everybody get up and use the bathroom. Wake everybody up. And, it was just, I remember being so tired of being woken up every night at 2 a.m. in the middle of the night because somebody had to use the bathroom and everybody gets punished for it. Oh, no. And that kid would also get, their demerits just because they had to use the bathroom. And so many kids were wetting their beds trying not to do this that they actually had their own separate laundry baskets that they would put out in the hallway. And it was almost like a shameful thing because you'd see that person's basket out in the hallway and oh, they wet their bed. And so every morning when people would go by to get their laundry, they'd be like, oh, here's so-and-so's bucket. Here's so-and-so's bucket. And
it's very similar to the Hephzibah House, which is another IFB program that was open for over 4 decades. And they were giving them an absurd amount of water to drink, forcing them.
Yeah.
And then having them hold in their urine, which is absolute torture. And when they did wet themselves, they were shamed. And that's the same thing with Lighthouse.
Yeah.
It's just awful.
Yeah. We had to drink 3 cups of water within 15 minutes in the morning, and then 2 cups of water within 20 minutes for lunch, and then another 3 cups in 15 minutes at dinner. And so you'd almost have to use the bathroom at the same time every day. So every single day for 4 years, I thankfully did not wet myself while I was there. But
I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you
every day at midday, it was like the worst time. I would be like, God, I just hated it every day because I knew I go to the bathroom. I'd literally go to the bathroom right before church and I'd say, I know that in 40 minutes, I'm going to excruciatingly have to go again. And I just knew that that would be the case every single day. And it sounds so dumb to other people, but it's like for 4 years, I would have to do that every day. And it sucked. It was so bad. And I probably do have, some kind of not great.
It's a big deal. It's a lot of fight or flight. So how long were you in fight or flight? Would you say your entire time, every day you were in fight?
Yeah, I mean, you know how it is. It's very much the entire experience. You really have to
the answer to that question, but I'm just asking.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for 4 years, I was there for 4 years, and for 4 years, I really had to survive. And survival for me often looked like a freeze response in that I was very dissociated most of my time there, and just trying to get through it on a day-by-day basis. They very much would tell us, and probably told you as well, to forget about your friends back home because they're going to forget about you. That's what they would tell us.
Right.
And I realized that was actually something I needed to do in order to not be in this constant state of longing for my home. And it's sad, but that's the reality of kind of what needed to happen to get by there day by day.
For the audience that doesn't know about these cultures, the culture in this place was you couldn't talk about secular music. That means, and during my time in the 80s, it was Madonna, it was Prince, it was Boy George, Michael Jackson. You could not mention the name or a song. You couldn't sing a song.
Mm-hmm.
One time I sang On the Road Again and I was punished for it. It was just another world. You couldn't mention a boyfriend's name. I was forbidden to mention my boyfriend's name. I couldn't mention him again. I couldn't write him. I couldn't talk to him on the phone. You couldn't mention friends from the outside world. It didn't matter if they were Christian and you went to a Christian school like I did. I couldn't mention my friend Brenda's name ever.
Yeah.
The whole time I was there. It was a different world. The only thing
it's very cultic. It's a cult.
Honestly. You couldn't even have a normal conversation. My conversation to just play it safe because you never knew the rules were changing all the time. So to play it safe, I talked about God and the Bible. Mm-hmm. And even that was questionable.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about food a lot. So if we could talk, it would be like food or, because a woman's place is to get married and have children, we'd talk about like baby names. Oh, my future baby, I'll name them this. And there was, like you say, nothing else you can talk about. It's not even just music. You can't talk about movies. You can't, at our program, we couldn't say the word pants in the context because it was in the context of speaking about a man.
They took out the verse of Deuteronomy because I was trying to figure out what the hell is the justification on pants. How come you can't say the word pants and all of a sudden Palmer talks about Deuteronomy? It's something to this effect, and correct me if I'm wrong. Men should wear men's apparel and women should wear women's apparel. How general is that? Does that say pants anywhere in that verse?
All the pictures have men in skirts, so I don't know what they're. Yeah, no, they were just their whole thing was just to control us, to make us like a singular herd mindset in this place, and just be controlled and have no self-expression. It wasn't like we could talk about things that we liked. I mean, I'm sure same for you, but we couldn't say like what city we were from in California. Like I couldn't say what city I was from, or talk about. I couldn't even say. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. You couldn't have a normal teenage conversation with another student. And you couldn't, they did that on purpose too. And for the reason is to just kind of isolate yourself, even within the program. But go ahead.
I mean, we were punished for making friends with people.
Exactly.
If you sat with the same girl at lunch, even if you didn't talk to her, just sat at the same table as her for 3 days in a row, you're going to be on separation because you guys are getting too close. Like I was on what they call warning, meaning that I was getting too close to some of the girls there in terms of friendships. I was put on warning with like
God
2 or 3
forbid
students.
you get close to somebody as a friend.
God forbid I have a friend at this horrible place But yeah, that was it. The truth was, if you had a friend, they didn't trust you to follow the rules. And so you were not allowed to have friends. It was against the rules of this program. And
It
there was
happened to
obviously
me one time, and that one time I ended up isolating myself from everybody.
Yeah. That's
Because
what happens. You're like, I'm punished for this. All I'm trying to do is make my situation better. So you turn inward.
Right.
You turn inward and you submit, because that's the best thing you can do to better your current situation.
And you're trying not to get in trouble. You're trying not to be a red flag in there.
Yeah. And like you said, you get in trouble for everything. You forget your Bible in the other room. You're
right. There was enough to get in trouble with, let alone.
Which is amazing for such a small, confined place and limited resources. Right. You're like, how is there so many things that I can get in trouble for? I couldn't tell you all the rules, but there was like 6 pages of, I can't crack my knuckles. I can't pick my nails. I can't look at this person. I can't be within this many feet of this person. There was no physical touch. There was no, you couldn't even listen to Christian music that like had drums in it. And not that we had radios or any way to even do that, but like that was demonized.
Amy Grant was a big no-no, and we couldn't even say her name.
Yeah, you couldn't even say the names of these people, like actors, movies, non-existent here. Like this is like living in some other time.
And everybody was beating to that same drum. All the students, all the staff, everybody.
Either way.
How did you end up coping with being persecuted in this place mentally, even if it was internal coping? How did you?
I have to admit, I was fully brainwashed by this program. I think that there is something behind faking it till you make it. And in the context of me trying to submit to the program, show them that I was abiding by the program, a huge part of that is getting saved or converting to their version of Christianity, which was very common for most of the students. I would say 98% of them would get saved oftentimes in like the first week that they're there, to kind of show this willingness to get with the program. And so after getting saved, I very much tried to submit as much as possible to not just the rules of the programs, but the beliefs of the program. And that submission really became true in like my heart, which is heartbreaking to say now, but was the reality of the situation. I really came to believe that I was a bad person, that my duty in life was to get married and to have children, that my duty in life was to spread the gospel all around the world. At one point, I believed that I was called to be a missionary to like the far parts of Canada, like none of it and stuff like that. Like I thought God wants me to be in the most miserable place on earth, and that would be the most miserable place for me. Like that's the kind of mindset that I started to have after being in this program for so long.
It was programming.
It was absolute programming. Yeah, absolutely. And I fully subscribed to it. I'd been there for so long. I had grown up there. I'd been there since I was 13 years old. I was almost 18 years old. So I really it really started to become a part of who I was. Even though it wasn't real. It's not even real in the context of like most everyday Christians are not this extremist and crazy.
It doesn't take long, because I was only in the program. I'm just comparing the similarities here, and to give the audience a different perspective.
Yeah,
I was only in there for 8 months, but 8 months of abuse is a long time. I can't even fathom the length of time that you had to endure in there. But to give you an idea, I was already brainwashed after a month or less than a month. I was already brainwashed to think.
When you're surrounded by everybody who's telling you that, including other students who came through the same situation that you did, it's really easy to be indoctrinated.
And it doesn't matter how confident you are when you get there, or what your belief systems are, or how strong-willed of a person you are. After a while, hearing it over and over a day, and it's really 24 hours.
It is. It really is.
24 hours indoctrination.
And you mix that with child abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse, it's game over. Like, they're going to break you. That's what these programs are meant to do. And that's why they tout it's false, but that's why they tout some kind of success rate. Oh, we got your kid to change. yeah, you can get anybody to change with a gun to their head. Like you can get many people to convert or to submit, and any amount of abuse can do that to you, whether it's 8 months or 4 years.
Let me ask you a question. Part of the sermons that Palmer would preach to us, it was, you're an alcoholic, you're a druggie, you're not trusted, you're rebellious, you're a whore. He would throw out whoremonger, and whoremonger really means to associate with whores. Okay. He would make us feel like whores.
Yeah, absolutely.
That no man will ever respect us. I would like to know, because I felt like I had to wear layers and layers of clothes on me after I got out of the program. And I thought I felt so much shame and just a poor excuse for a human being, that I didn't deserve to be in this world. I mean, this is how this preacher made me feel, unfit to call myself a Christian. So I think Christians really need to pay attention and wake up about these horrible programs. Let me ask you this. How did you feel afterwards?
You know, once I got out of the program, I went to a Christian college because I was still very much brainwashed. I was still very much of that mindset. And it wasn't until I got to that college that those things, being called a whoremonger, all the ways that they were making me to feel about myself, those things started to fall off within about 6 months. I was even around other Christians who I realized just were not nearly as crazy as the ones I had been around my entire childhood. I started to see clearly again about like who I was as an individual outside of this program. You know, with a little bit of freedom and breathing room, I was able to kind of start picking out, you know, oh, this is actually something that's specific to me, and I can have these thoughts because, you know, at one point in the program, even like I felt like my thoughts were like sinful, and the program people would like know that I was having these bad thoughts because they would tell me like, oh, I can see you over there, like in your head you're thinking about bad things. Like they would tell us stuff like that. And so I finally was able to take ownership of not just like my own thoughts again, but like my own personality and expressions and who I was as an adult individual. And those things that they used to make me feel about myself, about, you know, being a bad kid, it started to fall off. It took some time. It took some undoing, for sure. But I started to see myself as a child that was abused and reacting to situations in my life, even pre-program, that were traumatic, versus a child that was disrespectful and just a brat and just, you know, all these terrible things that they said about us. You know, I was able to undo a lot of that, but it took some time.
I'm so glad that you're able to undo all of that. Did you do a lot of therapy?
I am in therapy. I did a lot of therapy initially, but not until I came back to California.
It's sweatshops. So my analogy that I was trying to make is that we were doing hard labor without pay, which is child slavery, if there's even a term in the US. Well, there is now. I'm making it. Is that we would have had more pay and better treatment in a sweatshop, or James brought to my attention, prison.
Yes, both. Correct. Both. Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, so we're back to the lighthouse right now and dealing with the aftermath with Hannah. So Hannah, you were saying that you did get some therapy. It wasn't until you were going to a Christian college that you were starting to gain your identity back, because in these places, our identities were taken from us. We weren't allowed to have our own identity. We were someone else's identity. We were basically, the way I like to describe it is a bunch of terminals connected to a server, and Palmer or the Cookstons or whatever the staff member was the server programming. So go ahead.
Yeah. So, it wasn't until then that I really started undoing a lot of that and figuring out kind of who I am outside of the labels that they placed on me, you know, being a bad child, being a bad person, being a whore, being a, you know, you name it, whatever they claimed that I was and made me feel about myself. It took a lot of undoing. And that definitely began as I had my freedom when I went to that Christian college. I ended up leaving that college because they definitely had their own issues, and coming back to California. And when I got back to California, that's when the world really opened up to me again, and I was able to embrace myself and love myself and get into therapy. Initially, I was actually homeless, so my resources were not great. But thankfully, in California, there's a lot of programs to help low-income individuals. But I didn't have really anything at that time. I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have a place to stay. I had no friends because I'd been gone for 4 years, and everyone grew up and moved on. So I struggled a little bit when I came back, but I managed to make some friends. I managed to find a couch to sleep on and kind of pull myself together. And I got in therapy, and I'm still in therapy to this day, dealing with the repercussions of the troubled teen industry. And that includes, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which differs from PTSD in that it's referring to long-term trauma in comparison to like a one-off event. Obviously, being at that program for many years kind of resulted in more longer-term post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as anxiety, which I'd never had in my life before the program. Never had anxiety in my life. And I developed severe anxiety, severe panic disorder, which I still struggle with today in a very real way. But with the help of therapy and medications, appropriate science-backed, facts-driven treatment, I've been set on the straight and narrow, and I own 2 businesses. I get to spend my free time. Yeah, I get to spend my free time now, talking about the troubled teen industry, meeting with survivors and their amazing efforts as well. And I couldn't be happier with where my life is at right now, but I always like to hang a bell that I am where I am today, not because of the program, but in spite of the program.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah,
I would like to ask you a personal question. Because of the fact that you said that you were homeless, it makes me believe that your parents were not supporting you whatsoever. And I would like to know, did you ever confront them of what exactly happened to you in this program?
Yeah, sure.
Like with them.
Yeah. So when I came back, in trying to refine myself, I started participating in behaviors that my parents did not approve of. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's accurate to say immediately my parents were unsupportive. It's just when I came home, and this is often true for troubled teen programs, my parents had a set of rules that they really wanted me to live by. But I was then an 18-year-old adult with a ton of trauma who was trying to figure out who they were, just like I was, 10 years or 6 years prior. And so I was not getting along with them at that point. So they actually kicked me out. I was back for about a month before my parents, or maybe 2 months before my parents actually kicked me out of their house. And that's when I was homeless and I just had the trash bags of stuff. But, after, time had passed, I had slowly come back into contact with them and started repairing that relationship there. And it wasn't until I would say it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago now that I actually addressed it with them. When I first got out of the program, I was very much, I just want to move on with my life. I want to enjoy my freedoms as an adult. I didn't want to talk about the program. I didn't want to think about the program. I just wanted to move on past it and experience life with freedom. Right. And so it wasn't something I was even thinking about addressing with anybody at that time. And it wasn't until I kind of started sharing stories with my friends that they were like, that's really messed up, actually, Hannah. And I was like, is it messed up to put a child in an isolation box? Oh, I guess, yeah, that would be considered child abuse. That's true. And like things started to click for me. So it wasn't until maybe I was 26 years old, I think, that I actually asked my mother, and this is kind of how they came to know about the program. I asked her if she had ever told the program if I was bulimic. Because at the program, they often would refuse to allow me to use the restroom during meals, which was always a rule anyway. But I would get sick trying to eat that quickly. We had a very short time frame to eat. And I would often get sick because I was very, very tiny. I couldn't eat as much food and drink as much water as they were trying to get me to do in such a small time frame. So I would often need to throw up. And they actually banned me from being allowed to go throw up in the restroom. Because they said that I had an eating disorder and I was forcing myself to get sick, even though I was sitting at the table in front of everyone. And they actually banned me from that and gave me a bucket and would make me throw up in the bucket. Sometimes they made me throw up on my actual plate of food in front of elbow to elbow with other students, like literally throw up right in front of them on my plate. And then they would make me carry around my puke in the bucket, and they wouldn't let me use the restroom after meals either.
Did they try to force you to eat your own vomit? Because that's what they did with us.
They did not force me to eat my own vomit. There was a time where they had me eat the other things on my plate, which had vomit on it.
Oh my God.
But
so
they did not
in
ever
essence,
force
they
me
were
to eat
making you eat your own vomit.
Pretty close.
In
pretty
essence,
close.
they were. Yeah, that's
Yes.
disgusting.
It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And they definitely humiliated. They made an effort, I think, to humiliate me over that, which was wild because it wasn't like at that point in time I was in detention or like in a lot of trouble. I was actually with the program, pretty submitted to the program. I just physically could not do that. And they showed no mercy or empathy for me in that regard. But
did your parents tell them that you had an eating disorder?
So I asked my mother, I said, did you ever tell them that I was bulimic? And she said, no. And she said, and I always start crying like instantly when I say this, but she said no. And then she asked me why. And it was like a very like surreal moment for me where I realized my parents really had no idea how I was treated there, where in my mind, I thought my parents knew what was going on, that they approved of what was going on, that they thought I deserved it, maybe even. And it was in that moment that I realized my mom had no idea.
Right, because the program tells us this. The program tells us that parents are...
They tell us that our parents approve of it, that they know what's going on, that they support them, not us, and that we're just liars and manipulators, and they tell our parents that. So I was very much under the impression that my parents knew what was going on and supported the program. And it was in that moment that I realized that was not the case. My mom asked me why, and I told her that story that I just shared with you. And my mother broke down into tears. She was mortified. My father was mortified. They said that they wish this wasn't what happened to me. Like they expressed that their disgust with these people for treating me that way. Oh. And it was a very validating moment, a very moving moment,
I know it's part of your healing process too.
Yeah, it did a lot for my healing process.
How old were you at this point? Were you 26?
I think it was about 26. Yeah, okay. It wasn't that long ago. It was only like 5 or 6 years ago. So
wow.
Yeah, it was pretty surreal, and it took a long time because before that I would just do like minor digs at them about the program, like, yeah, remember when you guys sent me away, and like I would just kind of make fun of them and kind of let them know my disdain about it. But that was the first time I ever like really got into an incident and like told them a story about something that happened there. I'd never told them about anything else. And to this day, I still don't really get into most of the stories with them because I actually see the hurt that it does to them to hear it. And of course it hurts me too. And I try not to like also invalidate myself in the process of protecting them. But they're very, very much aware and very supportive now of my advocacy efforts and the work that I do.
Are they involved in any way, like supporting you with legislation, or they?
They haven't. I'm not really that involved with legislative efforts right now, other than like promoting them when I hear about them. But they're supportive in that, like they've donated to various organizations that I've volunteered with. They've donated to Survivor Prom.
Wow, that's so awesome.
Yeah, and they and I think that there will come a time where they might even go so far as to like write a letter from the parents' perspective to help parents who are considering these options for their children, which I think is so important, because oftentimes people don't want to hear from the troubled kids. They want to hear from parents who sent their kids and their perspective, since they think it's a little less biased. So
it would be more of an impact if more parents would come on the shows. I've interviewed some parents on my show, and it was
if I get my parents to, I'll send them your way on your show.
I've had parents come on my show, and it was pretty cathartic for me because it was like talking to my parents, so to speak. And at first it was very hard for me to do it because I felt like I was afraid of what the parent would say to me, because I felt like it didn't matter the age. I mean, I'm 51 and I was probably interviewing parents that are younger than myself. Yes. But when you're abused like that, you still feel like a child. Totally. And so when they were on my show, it was very hard at first because I felt like, oh my gosh, if they say something, it could be a trigger to trauma.
Yeah.
But I did it in spite of that. And it was pretty cathartic for me. So I encourage.
I'm so glad you're doing that. I love that. I mean, I definitely can understand how that might be triggering. And like, I've definitely had even conversations with like my therapist or other people where they make like one-off comment and I'm like, there's no good troubled teen program. I get like so mad. But that's awesome that you're doing that. I love that. I think that's amazing.
And if your parents want to be on Pieces of Victory or whatever show out there,
I would love. I'll ask them for you. I don't know if they do it because I think that they are honestly a little embarrassed about having sent their kid to a place like many parents are. I think that's one of the reasons why so many parents refuse to kind of acknowledge the reality that they sent their kid to an abusive place. But I will definitely ask them for you. I think,
and also they're subjecting themselves to comments from other people too.
Sure. It's tough for them, you know, like they're saying, hey, I'm a parent and I made the wrong choice for my kid. That's a lot, you know?
Right. It is a lot. So if they can come on my show, great. If not, no worries. But just the thought that they
I'm sure they'll support you either way.
Yes. And just the fact that they are contributing to senior Survivor Prom, that's amazing. So
it's very cool. It's very cool. A lot of parents, so we have a whole bunch of people fundraising and a lot of parents have actually donated, and it feels very much like, oh, when you're in high school, your parents would pay for your prom anyway. So it feels like it's already feeling very cathartic to me. I'm into it. I like it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting excited about Survivor Prom now. So
good. I can't wait to see you guys.
Is there a website? There's a website, right?
There's a link. So we have a link tree that's basically got all the information. The tickets will go sale on a site called CauseVox, but they're not on sale yet. But that page will actually have all the information about the event and the tickets and the everything. But you'll see that in our link tree, which I can send you.
Sounds good. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see you there.
Well, thanks for having me, Janine. I love you so much. I appreciate everything you're doing. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on Pieces of Victory. And I would love to give you a free copy of my book, Pieces of Victory, and I will sign it, send it over to you.
Yeah, that would be amazing. That would be so cool.
Rusted Rhinestones. I'm sure James will sign his as well, and we'll ship it out to you. And
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. And I can't wait to meet James too. I hope he'll be at prom.
Awesome. And then I'd like to say to parents, if you have a 1% chance that this could happen to your child, why would you take that risk? My name is Janine Miller, and this is Pieces of Victory. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Janine. Love you. Have a good one. So as you know, it was an incredibly abusive religious program. And for me, it was very interesting coming from a Christian background. I grew up in a Christian household. I went to church on my own volition, and I wasn't necessarily against the concept of religion at that point in my life. And then going into an environment that used religion in such an abusive way.
Right. That's the same thing with me. I was a Christian. I even took it a step further and volunteered to go to a Christian private school in high school. And I was excelling in academics, and I was an example. And then I get thrown into a reform school. And it was nothing that I have ever experienced in my life. It was persecution.
Exactly. Right. So like I went to Christian schools as well before my program, a couple of private Christian schools as well. And I didn't have great experiences at those places, but it was night and day compared to the program itself. You know, going to church, I don't know if this was the case for you, you can tell me, but going to church 3 times a day was like so indoctrinating for all of us. And I felt bad for the students who actually came in who didn't have that background, whose families were Catholic or anything else, which
Right.
to us, we were presented that like other religions pretty much entirely were cults. Even Catholicism was regarded to as a cult.
Right. Exactly. They were bad mouthing other religions and
Yeah,
making
and wouldn't even let them practice if there was students who came in whose families had a different religious background. I mean, you know this. We couldn't practice any other religion. We could not speak really of any other religious beliefs.
right.
And that's a part of a lot of people's culture. You know, certain spirituality is part of many cultures, and that was just completely disregarded and demonized by
We
our
would be
program.
punished if we were to choose something different or make a decision, and it's supposed to be free will. I have
Yeah,
never heard such
right.
a thing in my life, and it was indoctrination. It was
Absolutely.
their perspective of the way things should be, and it was forced. It was
Absolutely.
forced religion.
Did
For,
they, when you were at the program, did they force you to do the Bible reading and the singing and all that as well?
right, we had to memorize, and if we didn't memorize, we would be punished.
Yeah, exactly.
Days
It's
we
crazy. I look at other programs in the troubled teen industry, and I almost, in a weird, sick way, envy them sometimes when they tell me, oh, and then you would graduate once you got to this level. Whereas I don't know if it was the same when you attended, but there was just no concept of timeline or things you were supposed to accomplish in order to eventually get to leave this place, right?
right. So there
Yes.
wasn't any hope. It was
Yeah, there was nothing to be like, oh, let me show good behavior for this long or get to this level or get to this even colored shirt. You know, I assume you guys had colored shirts as well. And
we didn't have the colored shirts, but
didn't.
we had the hierarchy.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. But it wasn't like, oh, when you got to helper or something, you got to leave.
Right. You didn't
Yeah.
get to leave by being a helper. You just
Yeah. You just like in a better,
power.
they thought you were more with the program type
You
of
had
thing.
more power, and they were encouraging to abuse other children.
Exactly.
It was
Yeah.
like the Lord of the Flies.
And I think that a lot of programs do utilize other students to abuse the other students or keep them in check as well. But I haven't heard too many accounts where other programs also were forcing you to physically restrain other students. Did you ever experience that when you went to Victory?
Yes. We were encouraged to punish, have a repercussion, participate in abusing other children, especially when we had no other recourse. So the perfect example, and I won't use this person's name just to protect another survivor, but let's call her Jade in my book.
Mm-hmm.
That is the pseudonym I gave to her. She was duct taped to a chair, and I know students participated in the duct taping and the handcuffs behind her back, duct taped her ankles, duct taped her mouth, while other students were persecuting her in the name of God, taking out Bible verses and demoralizing her. And it was all orchestrated by the staff. But we had to participate in it. I never said anything personally. I was just in shock. I couldn't, but this was my welcome packet to Victory Christian Academy. I couldn't believe this was happening in a Christian school.
In a Christian facility, yeah.
Right.
And so was that like a rap or an attack therapy
Yes,
scenario?
it was a rap. So very similar.
Yes.
Every Wednesday it was a rap.
Yeah. We had raps as well. Ours were so for anybody watching, raps are very much like attack therapy sessions at our program. And for us, it was in the chapel. We thankfully did not have anything as horrifying as duct taping a child to a chair, but we did get together in the chapel, usually on Saturday nights. And after having like a review of the rules that people were breaking a lot that they wanted to yell at us for as a group, they would actually have the helpers stand up, and they would have already picked out a couple of people that they wanted to talk about who had done extra bad that week, and they would make them stand up, and then everybody would kind of, give their opinions on this person's behavior and what they think, their relationship with God was like that's causing them to behave this way, and what their family must think of them, and all those terrible things that you would
It was so
say is just on a peer-on-peer situation, very dog eat dog. And it was heartbreaking to me because at one point after I came home from the program, I actually obtained some of the letters I had sent my parents, which, as you know, are often redacted or torn up or never make it home or whatever. But I found some that my parents actually had in store where I was telling my parents about a rap that actually got through to them, saying we were up in the chapel till 3 a.m., yelling at these girls for their behavior. And
wow.
I was shocked that that got out.
Was normal. These people actually think that that's normal, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked that made it to my parents. I was shocked that my parents didn't do anything about it at the time. I can only assume that the staff called my parents along with that letter because there were some notes on there already that they were kind of justifying what happened or whatever.
Oh my God.
And told my parents that it wasn't a big deal apparently to keep children up until the early morning hours doing attack therapy. I don't know how they got around that, but I mean, it's clearly recorded.
Wow.
Probably the only way I could have recorded anything because I'm not sure how Victory was. But at Lighthouse, I was often banned from having pen and paper. We couldn't keep like a diary, for example.
Right. We couldn't have a journal or a diary. And one person was keeping a journal in our dorms, and they found out. And all of a sudden, when we came back to go to our bunks, everything was in disarray. Trashed. It was upside down, turned over. All of how we had to keep all of our socks and everything in order.
Prisoners. That's what you do to prisoners.
Basically, they took all the drawers and tossed them. It's in my book. And the whole place was filled with items. And now we had to figure out which one was ours and put it all back together.
They did that to us too a couple of times. You'd come in and stuff would be tossed.
It was like a raid.
Yeah. Isn't that the craziest thing to do to children?
After a raid.
Yeah, it's absolutely a raid. That's absolutely what that is. And the fact that any program, any institutional environment would say, no, you can't keep a journal is the biggest red flag I think I've heard of all the things that are like maybe not abuse, but huge red flag. You can't keep a journal.
Right.
They don't want people recording things.
There is something wrong with that.
They don't want you to record what's happening.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Or have feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were punished for expressing have big emotions. I mean, I'm sure you experienced this as well, like crying or having like anger crying, and that even like balling up your fists or like anything like that you're getting in huge trouble for that. I mean, you could be sent to GR or I don't know what you guys called it, but the isolation room.
The Get Right room, which is
just for that.
Isolation.
Yeah.
And then they just called it the Room of Grace when it went to Lighthouse.
It was still the GR. It was still GR. It didn't become the Room of Grace, I think, until the last year or two that they were open. And that was around the time that I believe it's Alexandra came and did her article.
Oh, yeah. Alexandra's Zayas.
Zayas, yeah.
Yes.
It was around the time that she came and did that article that they renamed it, I think, the Room of Grace. Actually, I take that back. It was a little bit before that because I was still there when they called it that. But
I think it was a little bit before that because it talked about it in that article.
Yes.
As the Room of Grace.
It was before I left, and that was after I left, so I take that back. But it was towards the end of my stay there, which I left just like 2 years before they closed.
But Room of Grace, the Get Right room, it's the same thing. It's just
the same thing. And I don't know if you've seen, but you probably have. The paperwork that was given to our parents that actually described GR, the Room of Grace.
Oh, please tell us about that.
Yeah.
I don't know what my parents signed.
Oh, I will send you a copy of it and you can put it in this video if you want.
Yes, do it.
But it states on that, it's a form that's talking about, we use this method. I don't know if I don't want to quote it wrong, misquote it, but we use this method of isolation only in instances where your child is a danger to themselves or a danger to others.
Oh my God.
Yeah, complete lie. And they're really framing it to parents like this is an emergency situation that we will only use, when your kid's going to die or somebody's going to die. Like,
and let me ask you, Hannah, how many times did you see that Get Right room or the Room of Grace?
Oh my goodness. There were children in there for months. There were children. I don't know how many boxes you guys had, but they would makeshift extra boxes because there was not enough boxes for the amount of students that they wanted to have in there. So they would literally create new spaces for them, and children were in there sometimes for months. And I think for things as easy as not wanting to do their homework in school, probably because they were being abused, and that was their way of kind of responding to the fact that they were being abused.
Forgetting a pencil. Jody Hobbs, who is survivors of institutional abuse,
Sure. Yeah,
she forgot a pencil and she was locked in there for 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh, I've never heard of that one. That's crazy.
That's crazy. And girls were locked in for days, weeks, and months at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I there's a specific instance that I always quote and sticks in my mind, where one student wouldn't stop picking her fingernails, which we weren't allowed to do. We were not allowed to pick our own fingernails.
I remember that.
Yeah, and she at first was sent to the corner, like, you know, this is an 17-year-old girl standing in the corner like a 6-year-old. Sent to the corner to stand there for a few hours, and she continued to pick her nails. So they then tackled her to the floor, floored her, pinned her down, sat on her back, and then took her to GR for a minimum of 3 days. I don't remember how long she actually stayed there, but she was there for at least 3 days, all for picking her fingernails.
That's so sad. And she was probably doing that to cope with the trauma that was.
Oh, I mean, this child, from what I remember, this child suffered from a number of mental illnesses and probably needed to be on medication for some things. I mean, he needed professional help. We had a lot of students.
They weren't giving the students any of the medication, and they would just cut them off cold turkey. And they have to wean them off this medication if you're trying to get them off, first of all. Otherwise, you're going to have health issues, including death.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm sure you saw that too. And I think it's common for religious programs in particular to kind of say, you know, and especially in regards to like emotional or emotional illnesses, things like depression or anxiety, to say, oh, that you need God will help you with that, you know, instead of allowing those students to have medication. Like you say, oftentimes they were on before they even got there and they just got cut off.
Exactly.
Or I can't imagine what kind of damage that does to a growing child's brain at that point.
Exactly. So whether it was big pharma or if it was recreational drugs, you can't just quit cold turkey. There were girls in there withdrawing. And I was just thinking, my parents always thought I was on drugs. And I thought to myself, good thing I was never on drugs. I never was on drugs. I would have been suffering if I were in that place. Yeah. Because they would just quit cold turkey.
Yeah, you could definitely see, I mean, and they would do nothing for their symptoms either. It wasn't like, oh, you get to stay in bed for the week while you detox, right? It was like, no, they dragged them from room to room with the rest of us. Right. And, you know, they're just hurting the whole time. No empathy, no sympathy. You know, at that point, they're just a criminal to them.
Rape allegations with Ramirez, correct? And how many others do you think were raped by Palmer that didn't come forth? I'm thinking Carrie Dunn too, but I'm speculating. But
that's a good speculation. I would agree with you on that.
Concrete is that she was killed.
Yes.
She was hit by lumber, according to Palmer and according to the article, and it was just a small paragraph on it.
Yes.
So back to Carrie Dunn. So Carrie Dunn, she died while I was in the school. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Oh, I don't think I did know that you were at that program when she died.
I was at the program when she died. And all of a sudden a helicopter was coming into on the compound. And I'm thinking, oh my God, we're being rescued. That was the first thing that I thought. All the girls were screaming down the halls. And I'm thinking they're screaming because deep down inside, they wanted to leave.
Yeah, of course.
And all of a sudden, we were all pulled in the chapel where Palmer was crying and said that Carrie Dunn is no longer with us. And said during one of the work, because we had to work, we did hard labor without pay. And she was on the construction site with no hard hat. And a piece of lumber fell on her, according to Palmer. I don't know what went on. but all of a sudden Carrie is dead. And then
I mean, they would tell us stories of that every year, many times. Like we'd hear about it all the time.
and what's worse is we went to the funeral, but we went as inmates. The way that Palmer made us feel in chapel. This is a pastor I'm talking about. So if you're a Christian and you're watching this show, I would pay attention to false prophets that are abusing little girls and little boys. And he made us feel that we weren't good enough to go to the funeral, and don't get any ideas, because everyone, all the parents and everyone at this at the funeral will know that we're just jailbirds, so to speak, that we're bad girls, and that no one's going to believe us and think we're lying if we try to tell them we're being abused. So he pretty much prepped us that if we said anything, that it will be 10 times worse, and that nobody would believe us.
Yeah, that sounds like Palmer.
And so we're already trying to process a fellow student passing away. And then to add that to the mix was just horrible. And then to just have a glimpse of freedom on the bus, and then to have to come back to prison again.
Yeah.
Was awful. It's kind of like winning the lotto and then not able to cash in on it. I talk about that in my book. But
yeah,
the point is, Carrie Dunn passed away, and he said, well, at least she's not, the parents said, at least she's not on the streets anymore and she's in heaven.
God, absolutely not.
And he told us that. He said, don't get any ideas. Social services is not going to come and check out. He was not afraid of authority. And he was right.
He was crazy. Palmer was absolutely crazy. I mean, don't get me wrong. The people who ran my program were abusive, but they weren't necessarily crazy. Palmer was crazy. Absolutely nuts. And I mean, we heard
as well.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think the people running your program was crazy as well. Tackling.
I mean, yeah, they were crazy in their own right.
A pregnant girl, making her lose her baby. They were all crazy, and they were following Palmer. So anyone who is following Palmer is crazy.
Oh yeah, I mean, unwell. I mean, I think about the people who ran my program, the Cookstons. I'll say their names. I'm not afraid to say that. This is a couple who willingly would tell us all that they got married because he knocked her up when they were like 14 years old. And I think they're actually 13 years old, but I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt and saying 14. And they're like, oh, and our parents made us get married. I'm like, wow, you sound like really great influences for this school of children that you are going to tell our, hellions for our involvement in sex and all that stuff.
It was very hypocritical, especially since the Cookstons were the very ones that said to another survivor on my show that it was God's will that the child died. The unborn baby is dead because they tackled her. They made her have a miscarriage.
Wow.
So they pretty much aborted that baby and then said it was God's will. That's disgusting.
Oh, yeah. They loved saying things were God's will. I mean, all the staff did. I mean, we had a few staff in common, you and I. We had, I think, Brother Brown was there also when Carrie died.
Brown, yes.
And I'm not sure if Desney was with you guys. Was Desney with you guys?
That doesn't sound familiar.
Well, anyway, we had quite a few. They were all similar in terms of their character, right? So Palmer owned the property that Lighthouse sat on, and in fact, I think I and a mutual friend of ours had done a little research, and she had found that Palmer actually always was the one that owned Lighthouse, and it was never given like ownership to the Cookstons. It was always under his name. And
he was in the background because
he was there. He lived there.
Because of the fact that he had rape allegations of Ramirez.
Yeah, absolutely. The Ramirez story is horrifying, but a really great example of who these people are. Not just Palmer, but my program staff. And the fact that anybody could, like you say, follow somebody who has even these allegations against children,
right,
is mind-blowing to me. Sometimes staff hide behind, oh, I have good intentions, I care about children. And at that point, I have to say, no, you do not.
Right.
Like, if you cared about children, you would not be supporting an institution run by a man with rape allegations. So there's certain lines where, even if there's an allegation, you say, I don't want to be involved. I don't want the perception of working for such a place as this. And it's funny because the staff would also say, they wouldn't want to be around the girls alone because what if we say something or whatever? And it's like, well, you seem to understand what the perception is there, but you don't understand the perception of working for an alleged rapist. So I have no nothing good to say about anybody who worked there. There were quite a few young ladies who also worked at the program as like junior staff or dorm supervisors. And for them, sometimes I think I might have a little compassion for how ignorant and uneducated they were. But at the end of the day, you still took part in physically abusing children via flooring them and putting them in isolation. And for that, I just have no mercy.
And even if they didn't participate, just watching it and you do nothing and you don't call social services and you don't get help for these children, you're just as guilty.
I mean, they really believed that they could physically restrain children in the way that they did. I mean, putting them on the ground, having other students tackle them and sit on them for hours. How anybody could think that that's an acceptable method of keeping children safe is beyond me.
Exactly. And what I want to bring to the audience's attention that these people running these programs of the troubled teen industry aren't prosecuted. Mm-hmm. And because they're not prosecuted, they're free to go to another state where the laws are different and rebrand and abuse more children for decades. And that's exactly what happened with Palmer. And that is happening in so many other places like Agape boarding school, just less than a mile on the property. Needless to say, they have another school for boys on there. Mm-hmm. So they did away with Agape, but they're calling it something else.
Yeah, I forget. I remember reading about it. It was terrible, but yeah, they just rebranded like they often do.
Do you want to talk about all the students that have survivors that have missed prom? Their prom?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think of prom, the reason prom came about, Survivor Prom, was it's not necessarily a happy story, but the reality is that many of us survivors of the troubled teen industry, survivors of cults, survivors of abusive congregate care settings, we all kind of have this thing in common that we missed out often on many of the teenage experiences that normal teens have, right? And that doesn't just include things like prom, that includes things like, your graduation, your sweet 16, having healthy friendships, forming intimate relationships, kind of getting to know the other sex, and or you kind of get to know yourself and kind of what you're into and what your passions are and your interests are. And that's kind of what high school is. It's kind of figuring out who you are and having all these kind of milestone experiences to kind of track them. And we didn't have that. Right. So I couldn't redo graduation for anybody, but I could say, hey, let's just come together. Let's celebrate who we are instead of being, demonized for who we are. Let's have a party. Let's have a prom and get together and just do that together. So, I can't, I'm not the first one to come up with this idea. I always like to say that.
Yeah.
What was that?
I was just going to ask you.
No.
Who thought of it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not the first one to think of it. I'm just somebody who's honored to be the first person doing it. But it's not my idea. It's kind of something that people have been kicking around in survivor circles for years and years. I mean, there's been plenty
happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of also like people have done reunions and fun things like that. So it's just another event that I think people will quite enjoy. It's in October 21st of this year. And you can find it like on all the social channels under Survivor Prom for more details on tickets and hotel reservations and things like that.
Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll put it in a ticker as well. October 21st in LA?
In LA, yep. It's going to be at a Hilton Hotel in LA, which I will announce later just because we have a special discount for people who are reserving those rooms. So I'll share that later on.
Awesome. Oh, that's going to be so much fun. I missed my senior pictures.
Oh,
yeah.
See, so everybody loves those. You need those.
I know, right?
It's that time in your life. You want
and
those.
homecomings. So yeah, senior homecoming. That
Yeah.
is. So this
Yeah.
will be,
Well, hopefully you can come and you can take your prom pictures.
yes,
You,
that'll
take,
be
you
nice.
and James can take cheesy, you know,
Yes, James
prom
is going
pictures
to be there
together.
as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love to meet him in
We'll
person.
go together. So
Yes.
yeah, I'm excited. Thank you so much for doing this and bringing this to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely.